They led Commander Rael Ashen Vey into the grand chamber of the Thessic Convergence in restraints. Past 900 delegates who had once called him the finest tactical mind their fleet had ever produced. Now they called him a traitor. "You will confirm for the record," said Speaker Nyeth Calvert, her 4 eyes narrowing from the high dais, "that you deliberately withheld a full tactical report on the human species, and that this omission directly caused the destruction of the Second Assault Fleet." Rael's wrists ached under the containment cuffs. Behind him, through the chamber's transparent dome, he could see the wreckage of that fleet still drifting in high orbit, 11 capital ships, reduced to slowly tumbling debris, silhouetted against the blue-green curve of a planet called Earth. "I withheld nothing," Rael said. "I gave you the full report. You chose not to read past the summary." A ripple of anger moved through the chamber. "The summary," Nyeth snapped, "said humanity was not a threat." "The summary," Rael corrected, "said humanity would become a threat the moment we gave them a reason to be one. You gave them 11 reasons. They were capital ships." No one expected what he said next. "I warned this council 3 times not to attack Earth. I told you they would not fight like every other species you've conquered. I told you their strength was never their weapons." He looked up, meeting the speaker's 4-eyed stare without flinching. "And I told you that if you insisted on proving me wrong, you would not get a second warning." The chamber doors burst open before Nyeth could respond. A junior officer sprinted down the central aisle, face pale, voice cracking. "Speaker, the Third Fleet. They're requesting emergency withdrawal orders." "Denied," Nyeth said automatically. "They will hold position and, Speaker, they're not asking permission to retreat." The officer swallowed hard. "They're asking permission to surrender." The entire chamber fell into stunned silence. Rael Ashen Vey, in restraints, in a chamber built to condemn him, allowed himself the smallest, saddest smile. 3 days earlier," he murmured, "I told you this would happen." 3 days earlier, the Thessic Convergence had never lost a war. For over 6 centuries, the Convergence, a coalition of 11 allied species spanning nearly 40 star systems, had expanded by a single, brutally efficient formula: identify a species with valuable territory, demonstrate overwhelming force, offer terms of peaceful integration, and annex whatever remained after the demonstration. It had worked on the reptilian Skarnu. It had worked on the hive-linked Ozrai. It had worked on 19 other species whose names now existed only in Convergence historical archives, filed under successfully integrated, when Convergence scout ships detected a species called humanity. Technologically primitive by galactic standards, barely 50 years into orbital spaceflight, occupying a single blue-green world at the edge of surveyed space. The Council's decision took less than an hour. Commander Rael Ashen Vey, then head of threat assessment, was the only voice in that meeting who argued for patience. "Their weapons are primitive," he told the Council, standing before a projection of Earth's fractured, quarrelsome nations. "Their ships are slow. But look at their history. This is a species that has fought itself for 10,000 years and never once stopped building, never once stopped adapting. They do not surrender to demonstrations of force. They study them." Councillor Thren Voskade, head of the Second Assault Fleet and Rael's oldest rival, had laughed at that assessment in front of the entire council. "You want us to fear a species that still burns fuel to leave its own atmosphere? I want you to understand them before you provoke them," Rael said. "There's a difference." The council chose provocation. 3 cruisers of the Second Assault Fleet were dispatched to Earth's outer solar system, with orders to disable a research station and take hostages. A standard opening move the Convergence had used successfully 11 times before, designed to demonstrate their power without full-scale invasion. It had never once failed. That wasn't even the biggest miscalculation Thren Voskade would make that week. The station's name was Meridian Six, a joint human research outpost near the edge of the asteroid belt, staffed by 41 scientists and a rotating security detachment of 12. When the Convergence cruisers dropped out of slipspace and opened fire on the station's outer shielding, a calculated show of force meant to terrify, not kill, Commander Elena Voss-Marsh, the station's ranking security officer, did something the Convergence tactical playbook had never accounted for. She didn't panic. She didn't surrender. She evacuated the civilian scientists to reinforced shelter pods within 90 seconds, a drill her team had practiced for exactly this scenario, though she'd never truly believed she'd need it, and then opened a channel to the attacking ships. "This is Meridian 6, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. You've made a mistake. I'd like the chance to explain it before anyone else gets hurt. The Convergence commander, amused, allowed the channel to stay open, expecting pleading, or terror, or the kind of desperate bargaining his species had heard from 19 conquered worlds before. Instead, Elena delivered a warning. You've just attacked a research station belonging to a species with automated defense treaties across our entire solar system, she said. I don't know what you were told about us, but I'd strongly suggest you leave before those treaties activate. The Convergence commander laughed and ordered a second strike. He never got to give the order a third time. What the Convergence scouts had missed. What their sensors, calibrated for the crude chemical rockets they'd observed in humanity's early spaceflight era, had simply failed to detect, was that Earth had spent the last decade quietly building something far more sophisticated in the shadow of its outer solar system. An automated defense network of unmanned interceptor drones, seeded through the asteroid belt specifically to protect research outposts too far from Earth for a timely human response. It wasn't a fleet. It wasn't even, technically, a weapon system in the traditional sense. It had been built and funded as insurance against asteroid mining accidents and industrial sabotage, a purely defensive measure nobody had expected to ever need against an alien invasion. But when Meridian Six's automated distress beacon activated, the network didn't hesitate, didn't panic, and didn't negotiate. 200 interceptor drones, each barely larger than a human transport shuttle, converged on the 3 Convergence cruisers from 17 different vectors simultaneously. The cruisers' shields, designed to withstand the kind of coordinated capital ship barrage the Convergence itself might launch, had never been tested against a swarm of small, fast, expendable drones attacking from every angle at once. Within 6 minutes, all 3 ships were adrift, their engines and weapons systems methodically disabled rather than destroyed. The Convergence commander, watching his flagship go dark around him, finally understood the warning he'd laughed off. Everything changed in the next few seconds, because that was when the second wave arrived. Not drones, not weapons. Human rescue shuttles, broadcasting on open emergency channels, offering medical assistance to the crews of the very ships that had just attacked them. The Council had made a terrible mistake, and it took another failed engagement. The Second Assault Fleet's disastrous attempt at corrective retaliation. 3 days later, which ended with all 11 capital ships crippled, and their crews rescued, rather than destroyed by human search and rescue teams, who treated Convergence wounded with the same care as their own. Before the truth finally reached the Grand Chamber, nobody on the Council had understood what they were dealing with, because nobody had bothered to ask the one question Rael Ashen Vey had asked from the very beginning. Not how strong is this species, but what does this species actually want? The answer, it turned out, was devastatingly simple. Humanity didn't want conquest. They didn't want revenge. They wanted more than anything else in their long and violent history to never again be caught unprepared by a threat they hadn't seen coming. Every defensive system Earth had built in the years since first detecting Convergence scout activity, the interceptor drones, the automated treaties, the rescue protocols extended even to attacking enemies, had been designed around a single principle humanity had learned across 10,000 years of its own wars. Overwhelming force earns fear, but restraint paired with strength earns something the Convergence had never once managed to secure from any species it conquered. It earned trust. Back in the Grand Chamber, as reports of the Third Fleet's surrender request spread through the assembled delegates, Speaker Nyeth Calvert finally ordered Rael's restraints removed. You knew this would happen, she said quietly, no longer speaking for the record. How? Because I read past the summary, Rael said, rubbing his freed wrists. Humanity has spent 10,000 years learning that the species who survive aren't always the strongest. They're the ones who understand their enemy well enough to never need to destroy them completely. What do we do now? Rael looked out through the transparent dome, past the drifting wreckage of the Second Assault Fleet, toward the small blue-green world that had, in 3 days, dismantled 6 centuries of Convergence military doctrine without launching a single unprovoked attack. Now, he said, we do what I told you to do from the very beginning. We ask them what they want, instead of assuming we already know. 3 months later, the first official peace delegation from the Thessic Convergence arrived at Meridian Six, not with warships, but with a single unarmed diplomatic shuttle, carrying Rael Ashen Vey as its lead negotiator. Alina Vossmarsh met him personally at the airlock. You're the one who warned them, she said. I'm the one who listened first, Rael corrected. There's a difference. Behind them, the reconstructed station hummed with quiet activity. Scientists, engineers, and for the first time, a handful of convergence observers, working side by side under a truce neither species had expected to need, but both, in the end, had been ready for. The galaxy would spend the next century learning what Rael Ashen Vey had understood from the very beginning, that the species worth fearing were never the ones who struck first. They were the ones who never had to.